Welcome back to the deep dive. We often think the biggest mission failures look like, a disaster movie, a massive crisis, a sudden betrayal.
Right, something big and loud.
Exactly. But the source material you shared argues the real threats are far quieter. They're often disguised as things we might even celebrate: intense loyalty or extreme exhaustion.
That's the core tension we need to unpack today. We're moving past the obvious problems and looking at the subtle, kind of surprising threats to integrity.
In these really high-pressure contexts.
Yes. And the uncomfortable truth is that the most dangerous moments, they rarely announce themselves. They don't wave a red flag.
They just happen.
They arrive quietly, as fatigue, as a small compromise, as cultural friction. So our mission here, in this deep dive, is to learn how to interpret these challenges diagnostically.
Okay, let's unpack that word diagnostically. The
Right.
core premise the source sets up is, well, it's provocative.
It is.
What if the greatest threats aren't external opposition or not having enough money, but our own unexamined assumptions?
Our assumptions about formation, about strategy, about resilience.
And this isn't just theory for one specific field, right? This is for anyone who commits long-term to something high stakes, high pressure.
Precisely. If we're looking for sustainability, we have to look for signals, not just obstacles. These challenges reveal whether a strategy is actually resilient or if it's just, dependent on fragile systems.
Or cultural baggage we didn't even know we had.
Exactly.
That brings us right into our first segment. This core thesis that challenges should be treated as diagnostic tools. I found this idea incredibly challenging because we are so culturally programmed to just endure adversity.
And that's exactly why so many of these challenges persist. It's not because the context is too difficult, but because our frameworks for dealing with them are too static.
We're managing the problem instead of learning from it.
We're managing the problem instead of learning the lesson the problem is offering us. Yes.
So, clarify this idea of the diagnostic function. What does it mean practically to treat a challenge as an instructor?
It means we have to reframe our whole mindset. A challenge isn't an interruption, it's an instructor. And when you approach it wisely, adversity doesn't weaken your impact. It refines it.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, say a team fractures under pressure. The reactive response is to fire people or relocate them.
The easy fix.
The easy short-term fix. A diagnostic response is to ask, what was missing in our system that allowed this fracture to happen? Was it communication? Was it trust? Was it an absence of shared spiritual practices? You look deeper.
I see. And the source implies that the cost of not being diagnostic is massive.
Oh, it is. The cost of just reacting is huge. You end up with, diminished effectiveness. Your public witness is compromised because all your internal struggles spill out. Fractured teams, and you're just relying on short-term solutions that drain energy but don't build any kind of long-term resilience.
The goal isn't just surviving the setback.
No, the goal is ensuring the setback strengthens the foundations for the next decade.
So the focus moves from blaming the external pressure to understanding what that pressure reveals about your internal structure.
Exactly. What these pressures reveal are critical formation gaps. And these gaps, they point directly to really profound opportunities for growth, for recalibration. If you see burnout or moral failure, you're not seeing a curse, you're seeing a mirror.
And the mirror shows you where you need deeper formation or wiser structures.
Precisely.
That reframing is essential. So let's use that lens and look at some of the internal pressures that expose these gaps. Starting with burnout. This is everywhere in high-commitment environments. The source asks a great question. What does burnout reveal about our theology?
Well, burnout is so often seen as a failure of dedication.
Or your calling, right?
Right. But the sources argue strongly that it's actually a symptom of a distorted theology of limits. It's this belief that God requires our exhaustion.
That suffering equals sacrifice.
Or that the whole mission depends entirely on my personal, endless effort.
That sounds like a kind of martyrdom theology where we reward overextension. So what biblical examples does the source use to help us sort of distinguish healthy sacrifice from just unhealthy exhaustion?
The first, and it's maybe the most relatable, is Elijah's collapse in 1 Kings 19.
Okay.
And what's so crucial is the timing. His profound despair, his wish for death. It happens immediately after one of the greatest spiritual triumphs in the Old Testament.
Right after calling fire down from heaven.
Exactly. He was physically and emotionally depleted. He wasn't being disobedient.
And God's response, which is the whole point of the critique, was so practical.
Absolutely. God's response was strikingly humanitarian before it was spiritual. It was sleep, food, water. And then a gentle conversation about his isolation.
Not a lecture.
Not correction, not a chastisement for lack of faith. It signals that we have to affirm our human finitude as a foundational reality, not some flaw to be overcome with willpower.
That gives immediate permission to pause, but what about the pressures of leadership structure? That takes us to the second example.
The second is Moses and Jethro in Exodus 18. Moses had centralized everything. He was judging all the people from morning till evening, all by himself.
And was collapsing under the weight of it.
Completely. And his father-in-law, Jethro, a non-Israelite, is the one who diagnoses the systemic flaw. He just says it plainly. What you are doing is not good. You will certainly wear yourself out.
And he adds something important there, doesn't he?
He does, he says. And these people as well. You're destroying yourself and the people you're trying to serve.
So the lesson isn't about Moses' character, it's systemic.
It's entirely systemic. This burnout exposed a massive formation gap in shared leadership. A mission that depends on one irreplaceable individual, the lone hero model, is just fundamentally unsustainable.
And theologically flawed.
Yes, delegation isn't just a management technique. It's a theological commitment that God's sufficiency extends beyond any single charismatic leader.
That makes sense structurally, but I have to ask. Challenging that lone hero complex is exactly what can get leaders marginalized, right, in some of these contexts. How do you start building a reproducible system without inviting criticism about your dedication?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's where adaptive wisdom meets faithfulness. You have to start small. You change the culture of praise.
Oh, so?
You stop celebrating the person who answers emails at 2 in the morning, and you start celebrating the person who successfully trained 2 reliable successors. It have to be intentional. Jethro wasn't telling Moses to stop leading. He was telling him to switch from being the source of everything to being the builder of infrastructure.
That's a practical lever. Okay, now shifting from exhaustion to moral failure, the source material insists this rarely begins with, outright rebellion.
No, it's not a sudden event.
So where does it begin?
It's explained as this slow, silent erosion of the soul. And it's usually the culmination of prolonged isolation and unmanaged stress.
A slow fade.
A very slow fade. Think of David's fall in 2 Samuel 11. The narrative begins so simply. In the spring, David remained at Jerusalem.
Absence. He was supposed to be at war with his army, but he stayed behind.
Exactly. Disconnection precedes transgression. Remaining at Jerusalem created this vacuum of accountability and focus, and it left him vulnerable.
So the risk is heightened for leaders in these high-pressure, often isolated environments.
Immensely.
Yeah.
They often experience intense cultural distance and geographical isolation from peers who truly know them.
So you're saying the solution isn't just stricter rules or more surveillance?
No, the solution's not suspicion. It's cultivating resilience through an embodied community that normalizes vulnerability and confession.
Holiness is sustained in relationship, not just by individual effort.
Right. When stress pushes you toward secrecy, the system has to be designed to pull you back toward openness.
But vulnerability is hard, especially for leaders. How do you create an environment where that's safe and not career-limiting?
It has to start at the top. It has to be modeled. The source suggests accountability structures should be restorative, not just punitive.
Designed to sustain, not just to catch.
Yes. A formation system that asks, where are you finding genuine rest, is infinitely more helpful than one that just asks, are you still following all the rules? If you can't be honest about being tired, you definitely won't be honest about your doubt.
That gives a really robust framework for those internal crises. Okay, let's shift gears now to segment 3. External friction. The source is clear that resistance and hostility. They shouldn't be a surprise.
Not at all. It's a predictable biblical pattern. Resistance is not an interruption to the mission. It's the environment where profound formation happens.
The earliest believers understood this.
They did. Paul saw affliction as communion with Christ. Peter told believers not to be surprised by the fiery ordeal. Accepting that changes how you react.
So if hostility is the classroom, what lesson is it trying to teach?
It's trying to teach the distinction between boldness and coercion, or between courage and aggression. When we meet resistance, the human instinct is to escalate. We try to overpower the opposition, shout louder. But external pressure forces a reckoning on what kind of power we're actually depending on.
It forces a choice. But what about the risk of, analysis paralysis? Leaders become so afraid of being aggressive that they stop being bold. How does the source address that?
That's a fair challenge. The source clarifies that faithfulness is never passive. It's about patient endurance, not inaction. The question isn't, how do I avoid conflict? It's how do I engage this conflict with methods that are consistent with the gospel, even if it means a setback.
That's a hard road.
It requires courageous, adaptive obedience, not aggressive control.
Which brings us to another layer of this, cultural backlash. How do we know if the resistance we're feeling is against the actual message or just against the methods we imported with it?
That is the crucial diagnostic question. And cultural backlash is so frequently the result of approaches that unintentionally communicate control rather than incarnation.
It's when the gospel gets tangled up with foreign cultural forms.
Exactly. With political assumptions or imported systems that frankly can look a lot like colonization.
The source calls these inherited preferences. Why are those so insidious?
Because they feel righteous. When resistance hits, we feel like we're defending the gospel, but what we're actually defending is a specific 19th century American model of church structure or worship style.
So the backlash forces us to ask, am I defending the core truth or just my comfort zone?
Am I proclaiming Christ or am I just exporting my system? That's the question.
So what does a faithful, adaptive solution look like? One that avoids both compromise and cultural arrogance.
True adaptation isn't compromise of the core message. It's radical incarnation in the method.
Yeah.
This is what Paul modeled, right? Becoming all things to all people.
In 1 Corinthians.
Yes. He didn't dilute the resurrection, but he used Athenian philosophical concepts on Mars Hill to make the message intelligible to that specific audience. He was flexible on the form, but rigid on the content.
Can you give us a systemic example of that kind of courage?
The source points to the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. This was a moment of extreme tension.
About whether Gentile believers needed to become culturally Jewish first.
Right, things like circumcision. And the council made this monumental adaptive decision. They released the Gentiles from those unnecessary cultural burdens.
It could look like political compromise, but the sources frame it as courageous adaptation. Why?
It was courageous because it went against powerful religious tradition. They risked internal division for the sake of external mission effectiveness. They chose contextual wisdom over rigid traditionalism, and that decision allowed the mission to expand exponentially.
Okay, so that gives us the full picture. Internal pressures, external friction.
Right.
They're all signals exposing gaps in our formation and our systems. Which leaves us with the final segment. What's the lasting solution for sustainability?
The lasting solution requires a shift away from relying on individual talent and toward building organizational resilience. Resilience is a theological necessity that ensures the mission outlasts any single person or generation.
It's about cultivating systems, leaders, and practices that actually mature under pressure.
That's it, exactly.
The source talks about shifting from fragile models. Can you give us an analogy for that?
Sure. Think of the fragile model as a single-engine plane. It flies fast, maybe high, and it relies entirely on the charisma of the pilot, the one leader.
If that engine fails, the whole thing crashes.
The whole mission crashes. The adaptive model is more like a multi-engine system with built-in redundancy. It might take longer to build, it's less flashy, but it has backup systems, shared leadership. It can absorb the shock of failure without a catastrophic collapse.
So this is where we build the structures that protect the formation we talked about earlier, the accountability, the rest rhythms.
Exactly. The details are the spiritual discipline of the system. Genuine accountability, strong leadership development pathways, intentional rest rhythms, communal discernment. These systems don't replace dependence on the Spirit. They create reliable space for the Spirit to work across many people.
So what's the core principle of sustainability in practice?
It's multiplication over centralization. It's a return to the wisdom of the 2 Timothy 2.2, which is the whole strategy in one verse. The mission endures when leaders prioritize entrusting knowledge to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others.
You're multiplying leadership capacity, not centralizing control in one fragile place.
And that is how a mission becomes generational. That is how it survives the inevitable failures, fatigue, and friction.
This has been an incredibly clarifying deep dive. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, in the bigger picture?
The synthesized takeaway is, I think, unambiguous. Faithfulness in mission requires both profound theological grounding in our limits, in our identity, and adaptive wisdom in our methods and systems.
And if either one is missing?
If either one is missing, sustainability collapses. Pressure will eventually find and exploit the formation gaps.
That leaves us with the final provocative thought to carry forward, building on the source material's deep insight. The pressures you face, the fatigue, the resistance, the confusion, They may not signal that something has gone irreparably wrong, but that something more mature is required. It's an invitation to deeper wisdom, to better systems. You're being called not just to survive, but to refine.